all of the F-16s that we're providing to Ukraine are old, F-16As and Bs equipped with this very old radar, the original 1976 radar. The latest F-16s are equipped with a radar called the APG-83, which has a detection range of 370 kilometers. So, and the problem that the Ukrainians are facing in air defense terms is that the Russians are not engaging in dogfights, but they're only firing air-to-air missiles at about 100 kilometers away. So currently having F-16s with 57 kilometer or 56, 57 kilometer radars essentially means that the F-16s are worthless for air defense. On the other hand, if we were to substitute some of the more modern F-16s for some of the older ones, then the F-16 pilots and technicians that we've spent so much time training could quite easily take over the more modern aircraft, and the more modern aircraft have the radar detection range to actually take some of the air defense burden off of the surface-to-air missiles. Hi, I'm Marc DeVore. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of St. Andrews, where I specialize in military innovation and defense technologies. Prior to that, I've been an outside advisor to South Korea's Agency for Defense Development since 2015. I've also advised the Swiss government on defense procurement, and I've co-authored a book that was required reading by comptrollers at the Pentagon. Ukraine needs air defense for a variety of different purposes and in a variety of different forms. So to defend against high-quality Russian missiles, Ukraine needs high-performance air defense systems such as the Patriot. To defend frontline units, Ukraine needs shorter-range air defense systems. And Ukraine has a lot of targets that need protecting. Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been targeted intensively by the Russians. Last summer, around August, the port facilities in Odessa, where Ukraine's grain harvest is exported from, was targeted. And obviously, Kyiv is being targeted, as well as frontline military forces. So you have a lot of different air defense demands. And any given air defense system can only cover a certain footprint of territory. That's calculated based on the range of the missile and the range of the radar that can cue and direct the missile. So, for example, estimates in terms of how many Patriot batteries it would take to cover all of Ukraine's airspace basically assess that it would require between 9 and 12 Patriot batteries to provide relatively complete coverage for Ukraine. Now, even if you could provide that, you would still need cheaper systems to deal with drones. Russia is using it at scale, Shaheds and other drones that have relatively long ranges, but are also cheap enough to produce that you don't want to expend $1 million Patriot missile to shoot down a Shahed, which is probably costing the Russians about a quarter the value of the missile to intercept it. So even if you can cover the complete airspace with Patriots, you also are going to want cheaper, simpler systems to defend targets against the cheaper Russian drones. The demand's extremely realistic. What it really comes down to is political will. So essentially, as I mentioned before, it would take 9 to 12 Patriot batteries to cover Ukraine's airspace. Before the attack on Monday, Ukraine had received 2 Patriot batteries from the West. One from the United States, one from Germany. A third that was American but had been deployed in Poland had been promised, and now an additional 3 have been promised. So at the moment, 6 Patriot batteries have been pledged to Ukraine, of which 2 are operating on their territory. And I believe half of those Patriot batteries have been pledged by the United States. So if Ukraine's need can be calculated at 12, if 6 are either there or on the way. The deficit is 6 batteries. 250 Patriot batteries have been manufactured, so are in service worldwide. Um, the United States owns 85 to 90 batteries, of which 60 are in service, meaning that the United States alone has 25 to 30 batteries that are mothballed or in reserve. So, also, Raytheon's annual production of Patriot batteries is about 12 batteries a year. So, there's a lot of ways, if there's political will, to find an additional 6 batteries to provide to Ukraine. Either the United States takes 6 out of its own service, European states on the front line provide Patriot batteries to Ukraine, and European states further behind the lines, such as maybe Spain or Greece, forward deploy Patriot batteries to Sweden or Poland to fill the gaps of frontline states donating their batteries. Or the US could use the Defense Production Act to divert Patriots that were originally bound for other export customers to Ukraine. Also, Japan has its own Patriot production line. So if we really wanted to, we could negotiate with the Japanese and probably buy or encourage donations of Japanese produced Patriots to Ukraine. So when one takes into the point of view that there's 250 batteries floating around the world, with 12 being manufactured on an annual basis, it's not that difficult to find 6 for Ukraine if one has the political will and the resources to do it. There's probably 5 distinct steps that NATO could collectively take to enhance Ukraine's ability to defend itself against strikes equivalent to that were fired off on the 8th of July. And we've only touched on one of those, which is providing more Patriot batteries, providing more air defense systems. So I think it would probably be worth touching on the others. Um, so from my perspective, the lowest hanging fruit would be to change the rules of engagement about how NATO is defending Polish and Romanian airspace. Um, so at the moment, and this is not particularly widely known, NATO doesn't shoot down Russian missiles or drones that enter Polish and Romanian airspace, but are not heading to targets in Poland and Romania. So this basically means that the Russians are able to transit missiles through Polish and Romanian airspace to then come at Ukrainian targets from the other side, which complicates Ukraine's air defense problems because radars tend to only detect things in the direction that you point them at. So if Ukraine needs to have air defense radars and missiles pointing west to protect against Russian missiles that might have been launched over Belarus, transiting through Poland and coming to hit Lviv from the other side, or similarly, Russian missiles that have been fired from that have transited the Black Sea, gone through Romania, and are hitting Odessa from the other side. In some ways, this NATO policy of letting Russian missiles transit NATO airspace actually makes Ukraine more vulnerable. So probably one of the simplest things we could do would be to simply change that policy and say, if it's a Russian missile or drone and penetrates NATO airspace, we will shoot it down. Now, Poles and Romanians may object that they don't want falling Russian missile debris landing on their territory, in which case I'm sure the Ukrainians would agree that we could shoot down the missile or drone above Ukraine just before it enters NATO airspace. So I would say that would, and if we changed those rules of engagement and therefore did not allow Russian missiles and drones to transit NATO airspace, then Ukraine could redeploy its air defenses that are currently facing west to face east and the other direction that the Russians are coming from. I would say that the second additional thing we could do to bolster Ukraine's air defenses would be to substitute some more modern F-16s for the F-16s we're providing. So in the media discourse on F-16s, we oftentimes just focused on F-16. Now, the problem is the F-16's been in production since 1976. And since 1976, it's been upgraded tremendously. So F-16s have been built with 4 different radars. Now, the original F-16 was built with a radar called the APG-50 or the APG-66, which had a detection range of 56 kilometers. And all of the F-16s that we're providing to Ukraine are old, F-16As and Bs equipped with this very old radar, the original 1976 radar. The latest F-16s are equipped with a radar called the APG-83, which has a detection range of 370 kilometers. And the problem that the Ukrainians are facing in air defense terms is that the Russians are not engaging in dogfights, but they're only firing air-to-air missiles at about 100 kilometers away. So currently having F-16s with 57 kilometer or 56, 57 kilometer radars essentially means that the F-16s are worthless for air defense. On the other hand, if we were to substitute some of the more modern F-16s for some of the older ones, then the F-16 pilots and technicians that we've spent so much time training could quite easily take over the more modern aircraft, and the more modern aircraft have the radar detection range to actually take some of the air defense burden off of the surface-to-air missiles. So that would be number 2. Number 3 is we need to be serious about sanctions. Early on in the war, Russian missile production collapsed because of sanctions. So when I was in Ukraine in sort of mid-2023, at that point, the Russians were able to produce a maximum of about 28 missiles a month. And a large part of that is that Russian missiles depend at about 80-90% on imported Western semiconductors. The problem is so our sanctions initially cut off those supplies, but the Russians then figured out ways to get around sanctions, importing semiconductors through the Emirates, Turkey, Kazakhstan, which now means that the Russians have quadrupled or quintupled their missile production. So to some degree, preventing that sanction circumvention and probably reducing the ability of the Kazakhs, Emiratis, or Turks to import semiconductors to what they were pre-war, so they don't sort of serve as Russian entrepôts, would also significantly degrade Russia's ability to continue producing the types of missiles that they used in the strike on Monday. And finally, I would say that we ought to think creatively about how to shoot down the Shaheds. The Shahed drones, if they were produced in the West, would have a production price of about $50,000 a piece. Hack data from the Russians suggests that the Russians are paying $277,000 a piece for them. But even at $277,000, it's inefficient to shoot $1 million Patriot to intercept them. Cheaper, older systems like the German Gepards have proven very effective, but also there's been various initiatives to try to use drones to shoot down these cheap drones, to try to use piston-driven aircraft. If I could, I would resource those efforts to try to find cheap solutions that are good enough to shoot down the relatively low-tech Russian attacking vectors. So, so I think that the air defense problem is definitely solvable, but it should be viewed as a complex ecosystem when we're thinking of the solutions, and a combination of sanctions, novel technological solutions, uh, providing providing aircraft with real air defense capabilities, and changing NATO's rules of engagement for NATO airspace would probably significantly reduce Russia's ability to do the types of things that they did on Monday.